we have Dr. Mansbach and his team on. If you don't know Dr. Mansbach or you haven't heard him speak, he is just one of the most thoughtful and creative experts in creating solutions for people, especially in this space of cognitive disorders, Alzheimer's, memory care, and dementia. And so I'm delighted that he's with us again today to share with us another solution. And I'm really interested to see where you in the audience take this discussion. So welcome, Dr. Mansbach and Mike McGregor, who is one of the folks on Dr. Mansbach's team. Really charged up to have you back again.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's great to join you once again. I really like these conversations, and I hope we can spend some time really diving into sort of the science and practice of meditative techniques for people with cognitive impairment in particular. And my hope is that people walk away with this with some very practical solutions that can really help the people they work with every day.
I love it. Okay, well, before we dive into that, let's get to meet the two of you. And I'll start with Dr. Mansbach. If you want to just give us a quick overview. I know you've done so much. I've got like 3 websites already loaded up to share with the audience, but give us that elevator speech on who you are and what led you to this wonderful career path you've chosen.
Right. So I'll do the fast elevator, so it's brief. So thank you for the introduction. Most people know me because I'm the director of the BCAT Research Center and the creator of the BCAT and Enrich Cognitive Ecosystems. Some people may know me as the CEO and president of Counterpoint Health Services, where we take care of older adults in terms of their psychiatric, psychological, and memory needs for the most part. And that's both in long-term care settings and in outpatient settings and in telepsych. And most of that work is in the DMV and the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. So I do research, I do clinical practice. I get the chance to work with some really great people at BCAT, including Mike, and great people at Counterpoint.
Excellent. All right. So Mike, tell us a little bit about your role. And I know that one of the reasons that I'm excited to have you here is you're sort of going to be sort of the point of contact for folks on some of the things that we're talking about today.
Yeah, so thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. So yeah, I definitely have the pleasure of working with Dr. Mansbach and excited for his talk today to talk about these meditations that he has designed to help those really with or without cognitive impairment, and excited to be able to share with you sort of the intricacies of what they're used for and how they can help. Not only help the patient or the client, but also help the caregiver, whether they're a professional caregiver or an informal caregiver. So really excited for him to talk about those specifics today. I am the director of the 15 for Me program. So we're an evidence-based solution for older adults, their families, and the professionals that take care of them. So this series and the meditations that he's talking about is just one component of what we offer. But he's going to go over sort of, if you're doing meditations right now, what are the different components that you need in order to sort of meet the needs of this patient population. So thanks for having us.
I love it. And as you all can see, we've already got Jackie in the audience all charged up about this because she says, I've been meditating for literally 49 years, and I'm so excited to hear about how we can use meditation for people with cognitive impairments. And let's see. And Jose has a question about the BCAT. What I say is let's hear about this meditative treatment and let's kind of get through that. And then Jose, I've got some questions that I want to ask Dr. Mansbach at the end when we get through of all that. And so we'll make sure to dive into BCAT a little bit more. But let's kind of hear about this treatment and what you've discovered.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm going to be talking about meditation and centered breathing techniques for, as Mike says, people who have and have not cognitive impairment. But the focus primarily will be in those who have MCI, who have mild to moderate stage dementia. And I'm going to go over why that's really important, both in terms of lowering the so-called BPSDs, the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, but in particular, focusing on reducing late-day confusion, what we used to and sometimes do still describe as sundowning. You can imagine how helpful it would be to have tools for lowering this type of agitation. And we're up against a headwind. So I'm a science guy, as most people who know me are well aware. And meditation is very popular, but in the science world, it's kind of gotten a bad rap for a long time. And I think that that's beginning to change. But that's especially the case in working with people who have cognitive impairment in general and dementia in particular. So what I really want to do is talk about the science of meditation for older adults, focusing on those with cognitive impairment, because I'm excited to be able to say, you know what, we can deal with this headwind. There's a lot that can be done. Some of these meditative techniques are clearly more effective than pharmacologic treatments are. So my hope is that when you leave here today, you have some direction that maybe you didn't have when you first logged on. Now, to put this topic in context, I should really begin by talking about three broad things. I won't go into great detail, but I'll talk about some of these kind of defining issues. This is really important. And then we'll sort of work our way to the specific applications of meditative techniques for those who have cognitive impairment, and talk about one particular application more than others, which is engage your senses and the science around that. So let's begin with this idea of meditation. And the first thing I want to focus on is that center breathing or diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing, with or without guided imagery, is one of what I think should be thought of as 7 brain health behaviors. All of them should be leveraged for people of all ages and people throughout the cognitive continuum. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what these 7 brain health behaviors are, but I will list them. And if you have questions or you want some literature on this, contact us at info@thebcat.com. We refer to this as the BH7. We do a lot of work clinically at Counterpoint in terms of this, and we do research work at BCAT in terms of the BH7. And the way I think to think about it is that there's a foundational level, 3 of the 7 behaviors that are kind of the building blocks, and they are contained actually in the 15 for Me program that Mike runs. They are physical exercises, cardio, which won't surprise anyone, for all the cardiovascular benefit that one can derive. And again, think about it in this way. This is for all people across the cognitive continuum and actually across the cohort continuum. Specific cognitive exercises is the second foundational element. And there we're really focusing on working memory exercises. This is key because you don't want an opportunity cost. So crossword puzzles and word searches are great and they're fun, but they're not necessarily brain health. They don't necessarily promote neuroplasticity or cognitive reserve. So we have some very specific ones that we support. The science is quite good. So once again, if you want to know about them, just contact us at info@thebcat.com. The third is centered breathing or meditation techniques. And we'll be talking about that primarily in our conversation this morning. So that's the foundational level. Built on that, though, are 4 others: sleep, and I've already done a lot of talking in the past on why sleep is important for restorative brain health. Diet, how important that really is as a lifestyle. Social engagement, and finally, mood regulation. So those are the 7. There are other things that are certainly important for brain health, but those are the most most important. So we'll be pulling out meditation today. So that's sort of one kind of contextual issue that we should be thinking about. The second is some of the key neurophysiological aspects, and they underpin why meditation is really helpful. And in dementia, why medication that focuses on both auditory and visual modalities is key, and I would argue essential or necessary at least. And so if you think about the neurophysiology, this isn't a course on this, right? So this is kind of neurophysiology made ridiculously simple. But what I will say about it, and for many of you, this is a review, and maybe for some of you it's new, but think about sort of the brain and meditation in this way. So our brains have a central nervous system. As you are aware, there are two parts of that. So there's the sympathetic central nervous system. Sympathetic means that this is you might think about it in terms of fight and flight. This is your ignition. This is sort of your engagement mechanism, and it happens automatically. And it's all based on signaling in the brain and the release of neurotransmitters and hormones. The most important one would be cortisol. And you all have heard a lot about cortisol. It's sort of magic for immediate acute situations. You're anxious, you're walking down a dark street, that sympathetic nervous system is going to kick in, and cortisol is all over your body, and it basically keeps your heart pumping, increases your respiration, does all kinds of pretty important things. But long-term cortisol is not good. It's inflammatory. It begins to degrade certain things like the hippocampus and the limbic system, which is important for memory. And I think most importantly, though, it disrupts the microbiota in your gut, and that's important because that's where serotonin is manufactured, and serotonin is really important in calming and in reparative functions of the brain and of the body. So that's sympathetic. Parasympathetic is that calming, anti, if you will, kind of agitation mechanisms that occur in the body. And so that involves the slowing down of cortisol and a ramping up, if you will, of those happy hormones and neurotransmitters like serotonin. Okay, so that's the central nervous system. And so clearly what happens with meditation is that, and it starts with breathing, is that it engages parasympathetic functioning. So it's recovery, it's calming, and it's very protective of the brain, which is, I think, why we're talking about this. Okay, so if you think about it, we have two brains. We have the brain in our skull, what we normally think of as the brain, and then we have an enteric brain, which is sort of the brain of the gut. We have two brains. And so serotonin, as I said before, which is so important in calming and in reparative functions, that's manufactured in the gut, our second brain. And cortisol disrupts the production of serotonin. So you can see why we're really thinking about, okay, so if that's the case, and if older adults who have dementia get agitated, particularly at certain times during the day, what's going on with cortisol? And is there something we can do to correct or improve that situation? And of course, the answer is there is, and I'm going to be talking about that today, and it is non-pharmacologic, non-medication based. And I'll talk a little bit about medications as well. So, two foundational issues contextually in understanding meditation that we've covered. Now, I'm going to be talking about older adults, mostly older adults who have cognitive impairment, and how agitation is so common, these BPSDs. We all understand that if you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or a related dementia, the probability of you having at least one of these BPSDs in a year is about 80 to 90%, and most people have multiple ones. And not only that, what we understand is that many people, about 30 to 40% of those with cognitive impairment like dementia, are going to exhibit more extreme behavior later in the day, the so-called sundowning or late day confusion. The window typically is between 2 in the afternoon and 8 o'clock at night, but you can narrow that. And mostly it's between 3 and 7, in some cases 4 and 6. You get the general idea here. And there are a lot of ways that we might understand sundowning, but mostly it involves a disruption in the circadian rhythms of the body and of the mind. So I'd like you to indulge me for a moment. So in my training, my neuropsych training, we thought about illnesses like Alzheimer's disease as primarily cortical. You know, the higher cortical functions, they live there, right? So the temporal lobe, the frontal lobe, so things like memory and the executive skills and comprehension and judgment and problem solving, those are fairly cortical. So we thought, well, if that's disrupted in illnesses like Alzheimer's disease, well, then clearly this is a cortical illness, but it really isn't. Yes, it's cortical, but it's also subcortical, and lower down is in the limbic system, it's a structure called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, and it controls all kinds of things, but one of the things it controls is sleep, and the circadian rhythms. Sort of the center of these rhythms is in this mechanism here, and this hypothalamus is so important because the circadian rhythm is sort of a master rhythm, controls all the clocks and all the cells. So if that's disrupted, we have a real problem. And in Alzheimer's disease and in many dementias, the hypothalamus and this sort of clock, internal clock, is disrupted, which is one reason why you have sundowning, because the brain thinks that it's, let's say, nighttime when it's actually daytime. And what happens at night for our brains? Well, they don't go to sleep, but there's certain functions that are appropriate for night, certain functions that are appropriate for day. And if we're asking the brain to do daytime functions when it thinks it's nighttime, people are going to get agitated. So at the same time, with this disruption in the hypothalamus, is that cortisol is going crazy in the body. So it stands to reason if we can find ways of controlling cortisol through parasympathetic activity, we're going to lower the sundowning events. And that's actually what happens. This Engage Your Senses program as part of 15 for Me is one way of doing that. Okay, so I'm going to now say that there are two misconceptions around sundowning, and I want you to ask yourself if you subscribe to either one of them, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the specific program today. So one program, or one thing for you to think about is that with respect to these BPSDs, so these are dementia-related behaviors, they fall into 3 or 4 different types. So
hey, Dr. Mansbach, I didn't want to interrupt you, but Abby was wondering, you mentioned BPSDs. Can you say a little bit more about what BPSD means?
Sure will. So these behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, they really come in sort of 3 flavors, 3 major flavors, 3 or 4 depending on how you might want to think about them. One is that you can have sort of misperceptions, which are delusions or hallucinations. So a person might become paranoid that they're being stolen, that things are being stolen from them, or someone's trying to hurt them in some ways. Or they may have a hallucination, and in dementia, it's usually visual rather than auditory. It could be both, but it's usually visual. And so that's sort of like one bin. The second bin is what we think about as behaviors of aggression. So they could be being physically combative, scratching, biting, hitting, all those kinds of things. They're very common, particularly around performing IADL or ADL care, mostly morning care, bathing, dressing. And it has a lot to do with just the immediacy, the physical immediacy and intimacy of all that. And the third is sort of the non-aggressive, ritual, disinhibited behaviors like trying to exit seeking, disrobing, things of that sort. So these are very common in dementia. And they tend to get worse when one sundowns. So in the late afternoon and early evening, you might see even more of this, which takes me then to these sort of two misconceptions. And one is about timing, and one is about type. And the timing goes something like this. In nursing homes and in senior living and in home health and home care, we tend to figure out when a person is sundowning. And let's say it's 4 o'clock. And we tend to intervene either right then or within an hour before that. And that's often, my colleagues might say, well, we're going to give someone a medication like Seroquel, an atypical antipsychotic, or Depakote, a mood stabilizer, to try to reduce the agitated behavior. And there's nothing really wrong with that. But it misses the point that sundowning, because it's related to the circadian rhythms, it's actually on a 24-hour clock. So it's not just what happens an hour before the symptoms occur, it's also what happened 12 hours before and 20 hours before. So you have to think about the entire 24-hour cycle. So the misconception is that you got to get something done right before these behaviors occur, and that's actually not the case. The other misconception, as I said, is about type, and the type is that we tend to get calls to intervene pharmacologically with a medication, and that's not always wrong, but it's incomplete. And this is where meditation becomes really important, or any parasympathetic behavior. And one of the things that we really advocate, and I'll come back to this later on in the program, is that meditation, particularly the type that I'm going to be talking about today, should be done throughout the day, starting in the morning, hours before you have sundowning. And the reason is that you're trying to lower the threshold of cortisol and sympathetic behavior. You're trying to lower that, and you're trying to help regulate these circadian rhythms that are out of balance in some ways. So I would say that if you're going to engage your senses, these videos that are meditative, centered breathing, do them at 11, do it at 12. And I'll talk about sort of different ways of doing that as we go along. So I think that's sort of the foundation. It's a little bit longer than what I wanted. Thank you for indulging me in that. And so now let's talk a little bit about specific programming on meditation for older adults, and what works and what doesn't work. And you can apply this to what you're doing right now. And again, if you want more information about the program that we have science for, Engage Your Senses, as part of 15 for Me, you can contact Mike McGregor. Certainly you can send your inquiry to info@thebcat.com, and we will give you more information about it. So the idea of creating videos that are meditative based on centered breathing, this is something we've been thinking about for a long time, and we really wanted to be able to get the science together to be able to point to something that actually works. So it took a while to figure out how basically to do that. So there are 4 basic elements of a video, meditative video, that can work, that must be there to work for an older adult. One is that there must be integration of centered breathing of some sort, right? Or belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. It doesn't have to be through the entire duration of the video, but it's got to be in there, because that's so key that regardless of what's going on in the mind, consciously, the body remembers. So the body knows what to do if it's breathing in the right way. So that's number one. Number two, from a sensory standpoint, just listening to the sort of the auditory part of a script is insufficient. It is necessary, but insufficient for appropriately engaging an older adult with dementia or cognitive impairment, because it requires a certain amount of inherent working memory or concentration or attentional ability that the person just might not have. So the auditory centers are notorious for deficits in Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, and that happens relatively early, certainly by year 3 or 4 in the illness. So if you just rely on what you hear, that's not going to be enough. You're not going to be able to retain a person's attention, and in fact, it could paradoxically be agitating rather than calming in some ways. But it is important because words are important. The third element that I'm going to get to in terms of the script, and then that is important, is the script has to be appropriate for someone who has cognitive impairment. So that means that the sentences have to be truncated, they have to be short enough that a person with dementia can hold on to them and process them. They can't be, in terms of the language, so complex that they require, that it's a greater burden on working memory being simply the ability to attend and focus so that you can do something, learn something new, or engage in some cognitive process. Working memory is so important, and it might only be 5 to 7, maybe 10 seconds for someone with cognitive impairment. So the script is important. So you can't just use any script, right? That might work for you, it might not work for someone who has dementia, and you can't only use a written script that is then read by somebody. So the rhythm of reading becomes really important. So the words cannot be, the sentences can't be too long, and the pace has to be important. And the pace is important because if you speak too slowly, that's a burden on working memory, and if you speak too quickly, it's a burden on working memory. So we had to work on getting it just right. And the fourth element is the visual component, and I think about it in this way. In most conditions of dementia, the visual cortex is preserved until relatively late in the illness as opposed to the auditory centers, which is why visual memory lasts longer for most people than auditory memories do. But not only that, working memory is optimized when you have a visual component. So if you can show someone with dementia on a large screen, picture in senior living or in a nursing home, or on a computer if you're by yourself, but on a large screen, a video that has this visual component, I think about it as the brain tether. You're tethering a person's attention to what's going on. And in fact, if you compare the ability to benefit from meditation and to engage and participate in meditation, if in treatment group A, you have auditory and visual, and in treatment B, you have only auditory, the performance of B is much worse. So it's important that you have these 4 elements. Now, in the telling, right, of the script, of the video, one thing that also helps is to use in the language triggers that are sensory, because they don't require higher cognitive functions in the same kind of way. You're not asking someone to imagine something beyond sort of their capability. So if you listen to the Engage Your Senses videos, we ask a person to think about what something sounds like, what something might taste like, what something looks like, what something sounds like in a way that is familiar, and familiar in that you're tapping old memories in some ways. Nature scenes are great for that. Not that everyone has lived in nature, but pretty much everyone by the time they're in their mid-70s has had some experience with nature. And nature is inherently sensory, right? You walk in the woods, and what happens? You listen to things, you see things, you smell things. So it's important that that is on there. In our Engage Your Senses, it's a set of 6. There likely will be more, but it takes a while to make sure that these are valid. So there are these 6 videos that are parasympathetic, and they meet those 4 criteria that I mentioned. Okay, so that's a lot of material, and that's a lot of me talking. What I'd like to do is give people an opportunity to ask questions about Engage Your Senses, about sundowning, about dementia, about meditation, and I'll do my best to give you the right answers.
I love it. And okay, so let's start first with Lisa, who says, what would an effective script look like for meditation with these patients?
Right. So first of all, it should not be terribly long. So you're talking about anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, because again, you're asking someone to focus for, if you ask them to focus for too long a period of time, you're going to lose them. But to do parasympathetic engagement, you don't need more than 5 minutes. So that's important. The words that you use have to be, as I said, they really have to be truncated, relatively short, and relatively simple. So you're not asking someone to leave the scene by thinking about it in a different way. You want to create engagement and immediacy in some way. So hopefully that'll be helpful.
Okay, great. And the in a caregiving setting or like a senior living community, what are some practical strategies or resources that can support the implementation of this guided meditation for the folks in that community with a cognitive setting? And with a cognitive impairment, I'm assuming you all work with some senior living communities, and is this
right.
Like, can this be done as a group, or is it one-on-one?
Well, it can be done as a group, and it is, and it can be done on a one-on-one situation. It can even be done in a quiet room when you have somebody who tends to get agitated in the afternoon, to walk with them, sit with them in a quiet room many hours before the agitation, the sundowning actually occurs. Where we see this being used the most in the senior living world is through life enrichment or the rec activities programming. And it is often done in a group. And one of the nice things about it is that if you have a large monitor, a large screen, you don't have to worry as much about functional ability from a cognitive perspective as you might for other activities, because you can combine people who are reasonably intact with those who maybe have more cognitive compromise. And we found very positive engagement for people from normal cognition down to MCI, down to mild dementia, down to moderate stage dementia. So for those of you who use BCAT testing, people who have scores of 25 and above do really well as a total score. It may sound a little confusing for people who don't know BCAT, but even people who have scores of 15 and higher can often benefit from this particular thing. From a practical standpoint, it's pretty simple. You just build it into your programming. What I really like about it, and I've seen people in life enrichment take it and run, Steve, is that they take a theme, one of our 6 themes from the 6 meditative centered breathing videos that we have, and they build all kinds of activities around it. So, for example, there's one about taking a hike, taking a walk in the woods, and all of a sudden you can do a number of activities beyond just the video itself. So I think it's kind of a bridge in some ways to parasympathetic programming at the life enrichment stage.
Okay, great. Lynn has a great question. She says, it sounds like these videos have been customized to meet the needs of persons with cognitive impairment and dementia. Could these also be used as a non-pharmacological approach to minimize the use of medications for managing behavior? Have you seen folks going through this who may have been aggressive or non-responsive, have you seen some changes there?
Yeah, so it's a very searching question. So let me say this about the pharmacotherapy and medications, particularly around agitation, and particularly in before sundowning, although I think it's relevant to at any time during the day. Medications can be very effective, and they should be carefully considered. But if they're all you have an incomplete tool set, I think. And that's really important. And I'm saying that as somebody who's in this space and is very comfortable with medications. It's not enough, and medications are not benign. So that you give someone a medication, has a half-life, it could have side effects, it could have all kinds of things that are going on. So what we found is that when you do this kind of centered breathing for people who have dementia during the day, and I think it should be every day during the day, two things happen with sundowning that are important. One is that the duration of the episode tends to be shorter, and the other is that the apex or the intensity of the event tends to be less. So I think it's a success if someone normally sundowns it from 4 to 8 and you can get them to do it from 6 to 7, that's a success. Or if somebody hits that 10 level, but you're able to keep them at a 5, I think that that's a success. I cannot say to you that it will always eliminate sundowning. So please don't misunderstand me in that way. But I can say that it is a very helpful tool, and you should be able to use less medication, and in some cases, no medication, right? But it depends on other things. And with sundowning, remember, it's a 24-hour clock, so you want to do parasympathetic activity, but you want to look at things like lighting, you want to see how people are actually sleeping. And Steve, at some point, if you want, we can do a program on all the ways that you can try to mitigate sundowning or late-day confusion, meditation being one of them, but there are other things that you can do too. Most of them are non-medication based.
Oh man, I love it. And as we've discovered on many of these discussions that we've had, how medication can, getting that dialed in properly, and how that can sometimes lead to a misdiagnosis as well. So that's really important in the care for our loved ones with cognitive impairment. Let's see. Okay. Lisa asks, are you familiar with respite videos with themes? And I did a quick search, and I found video respite for Alzheimer's, which looks like a video series, but she says, do respite videos follow the same or similar process to capture the residents' interests?
Yeah, so there are a number of videos that are out there, some, but very few, are meditation-based. Very little of them have any validated science behind them. And one of the things that I think is really important is if you're going to do something, you should have some scientific evidence behind it. It doesn't mean it will always work, but there's a much higher probability of doing that. And I'm not aware of other research centers having very much science behind what, the programs that are out here. And there are many activities that are wonderful for older adults with dementia. I mean, I am a strong advocate, even those that don't have science. But I think if you're really trying to improve parasympathetic functioning and reduce sympathetic functioning, I would go with the science.
Got it. And then Lynn says, what are the benefits of using meditations such as these for the caregivers and the families who work with the needs of the population? I could see where traditionally do the caregivers and the family members do the meditations along with the individuals?
So funny story. So in one of our communities in Northern Virginia, what I mean by one of our communities, it's a partner of us who uses BCAT and also has Counterpoint there. the response from Life Enrichment after using these videos was, I can see how they're important for our residents, but I don't know if they're more important for them than they were for us. So we actually like to play them for our residents because it relaxes us too. And so I think that speaks to the point. So whether you're in senior living or nursing home, or you're at home, with a loved one or you're a professional, caregiver, watch it yourself. I mean, we all want to reduce our stress level. We all want to increase serotonin in our body. This is a way of doing that.
Great. Now, let's see. Christina has a question on how do we access the videos from BCAT, and I'm pulling up hopefully everybody can see the BCAT website. I almost called you Dr. Falcon or Dr. Mansbach. Can you direct me to where we'd find the videos?
Right. So you go to the enrichvisits.com website, not the BCAT website.
Oh, okay.
And from there, you have to do a direct inquiry, and Mike responds to those inquiries, and he can talk to you about access to the videos themselves.
Oh, okay.
And remember
that,
yes, so the videos themselves, it's part of the 15 for Me program. Remember how we started it. Brain health is really important for people, and meditations, you should do them with your folks. I have passion and real interest in doing it, but it shouldn't be the only thing you should do. So the right cardio, the right cognitive, these are going to make your videos that much better, right? These are all foundational in some ways.
okay, great. I'm gonna drop Mike's contact info in again to chat, so reach out to him for the videos, and then okay, and Jose, now I see you've got another question here, and then I wanted to go back to your first question about BCAT in the beginning, but Jose says, if meditation for parasympathetic improvement analogous to simply watching a movie of interest to the resident?
So movies are great, but movies are not necessarily parasympathetic. So it depends on the movie, right? So they can be actually just the opposite. They can really rev people up. So the difference here is that this is designed, developed, and validated to focus on parasympathetic, calming, deep breathing stuff. If you watch a movie which is entertaining, it's probably not going to be parasympathetic based. And in fact, if you watch people breathe during it, are they breathing from their belly while they're watching a movie? Most of us aren't. So they're not the same thing. That doesn't mean that watching a movie isn't important or isn't enjoyable, but we're trying to think about these videos, reduce stress, but actually as an intervention to try to improve brain health for an older adult with dementia, or without dementia for that matter, and to reduce these BPSDs or agitated behaviors.
Okay, great. All right, so now let's jump back to the beginning where Jose asked,
okay.
Dr. Mansbach, can you explain how the BCAT approach differs from other pencil and paper cognitive health tests?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the BCAT is a cognitive ecosystem. It integrates different tests or assessments, in some cases screening tools. It's used all over the country. It's used in different countries to try to determine what's going on cognitively. So the primary test is not a screening tool. It's a test. It's called the BCAT foundational test. It's multifactorial. It'll tell you with very high reliability and validity, does this person have MCI? Do they have normal cognition? Do they have dementia? But it gives you factor scores, which are key. It, for example, will tell you about a person's ability to make new memories. It will tell you about a person's executive skills. It'll tell you about a person's attentional abilities. And it's associated with all kinds of predictors like falls and rehospitalizations and things like that. So that's sort of component one, the test system. Then there are a series of interventions that are part of BCAT, and they're informed by the BCAT tests. So these are like working memory exercises. You can even say like engage your senses could be in that, right? Videos could be in that. Again, it has to have the kind of science scientific methodology that demonstrates that people actually get better. Then the third component is mitigation or dementia, if not prevention, reduction programs. I think that there's a BCAT assessment for everyone. So if you don't want to do the full BCAT test, use the short form, right? I mean, that's perfectly fine. If you don't want to do all the working memory stuff, use the videos. There's something for everyone, and that's unusual. So BCAT is a provider's tool set, a scientist sort of approved set of clinical tools.
Great. Okay, let's see. A few more questions here. And he said, okay, he got the BCAT description. How is it different from other tests that we see out there?
Okay, so most of what you see are not tests. Most of what you see are cognitive screening tools like the MMSE or the MoCA or the SLUMS, and they're fine as screening tools, but they're not diagnostically based. So if you gave someone a MoCA or a SLUMS or a mini mental, it would give you sort of the gist of what's going on, but it won't tell you in a more definitive way. BCAT is based on a much harder science. It's a set of tools. So if you're going to do you wouldn't do, if you wanted to know, does this person have MCI with high reliability or validity, about 96% in terms of its sensitivity, you give them a BCAT. If you wanted a general idea, well, might they have MCI, you might do a MoCA or a SLUMS. So it's sort of, a difference of intensity in science.
Okay, and then Carol asked, what does BCAT stand for?
Yeah, so it stands for Brief Cognitive Assessment Tool because it started with one test way back in 2000. The first science started in 2006. The first publication, because we spent years making the BCAT. The BCAT came out in 2012, and there are many peer-reviewed articles on the BCAT. So lots of science there. And Steve, before we end today, I should probably talk about the Brain Health and Psychiatry Center for those people who are in the DMV, because
absolutely,
you get that question all the time. Yeah.
No, and let's do these two questions, and then yeah, I'd love for you to talk about that. Okay, so I think you may have answered this one earlier, but if you can just reiterate. So what have you seen with patients using this meditation technique, especially for sundowning or agitation?
These things. I think it reduces the duration and the intensity of sundowning. I think it is associated with better engagement in other aspects of life. So I think that's good. We haven't yet looked at things that I want to look at, like does it improve sleep? You're doing these videos during the day. You could do them in the evening too. We're pretty excited about trying to understand its impact on sleep and other brain health activities.
Okay, great. All right. So Shirley asks, after listening to your program giving data regarding cognitive impairment, would it be a recommendation for individuals after receiving their diagnosis to have a further evaluation by a specialist such as you to know how to proceed with their condition? I think Shirley may be teeing up the Brain Health Center perfectly. Would you say? Sure.
I think so. So let me try to address the question by talking about the BHP, Brain Health and Psychiatry Center. So if you're in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, it's easy to do this, although it's done virtually in other states as well. So the Brain Health and Psychiatry Center is a different kind of animal in some ways, and it's basically a counterpoint health services program that uses a lot of BCAT tools in it. And what makes it different are these things. One, it's very much an interprofessional model of psychiatry, neuropsychology, and brain health coaching, a strong educational emphasis on what we call the BH7, these 7 brain health activities. you should come to the BHP not just because you want a diagnosis, but you're really interested in, well, what do I do about this? So we have a lot of people who come here, turns out they have MCI or mild stage dementia, and they still want to live at home. So how are they going to do that? So you have to be able to understand, and I'll use memory as an example, Steve. To say somebody can't make new memories isn't very helpful. It's really much more helpful to understand what gets in the way. There's a whole process of how we make memories. And if you can figure out, where the disruption is. One example that happened yesterday, I was actually referring to this patient we saw yesterday, Steve, before our call. This is a person who went to, one of our local hospitals here, was worked up by a neurologist, and that's fine. But the problem was, person had MCI, they had amnestic MCI, they had difficulty making new memories, but there was no real guidance about what to do about it. So what we wanted to do is understand there's like a 4-step process in how we all make memories. And we were able to determine it's at that 4th step that the disruption in memory occurs. So there's a workaround for that. And so we prescribed for this man that workaround and some other working memory exercises to try to strengthen attentional abilities and things of that sort. So if you're interested in the Brain Health and Psychiatry program, it isn't for everyone, but that's our approach. You can certainly contact us at counterpointhealthservices.com.
Yeah, and now let's kind of dive into something that I was talking to you before we started. And how does autism play into cognitive impairment? Has the meditations, have you looked at that as with autism?
Yeah. So we haven't looked at it with autism, but we've certainly looked at it with attentional issues. That's a whole, autism is so important, and it deserves its own hour. I mean, there's a lot to talk about and unpack, so maybe at another time, but I don't think right now we can do it justice.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's the thing that just breaks my heart is that every week I am talking to a family or an individual about their parents' behavior and, have they been diagnosed? And then who do I go to talk to get it diagnosed? And not only myself, but people on these experts on our discussions, like, well, you got to have a diagnosis by a neurologist. And then this weekend, I was at this amazing play called The Dementia Man that was written and performed by a gentleman with early Alzheimer's, Sam Simon. And when he sort of talked about the diagnosis and the testing process that he went through, Dr. Mansbach, it actually sort of stems into almost exactly what you were just saying about having a plan. What are your goals? Aging in place. He talked about getting this diagnosis of early Alzheimer's, and the neurologist just walked out of the room. There was no sort of support or plan. It was like, well, we took the test, you're diagnosed, and now figure it out. And can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, in all fairness to people in neurology and in other areas of medicine, it's really difficult to know what's really going on from a process standpoint, not just a diagnosis. That isn't actually as hard as one might think. And then to know what to do about it. And most people are trained in the diagnosis, but not on the actual treatment, because if you don't have a medication for it, and by the way, we really don't have medications, despite what's happening a lot in the press. We don't have good medications, primary medications for cognition. But there are things that we can do that do either slow down decline or improve it. And so it's important that we do that. Neurologists are great, they're trained to do a certain thing. Neuropsychologists are going to give you a much broader and deeper understanding of what's going on. It's much more granular, it's much more specific. You don't just have to go to a neurologist for this. There are geriatric psychiatrists that are out there. There are a lot of people that are out there. The biggest problem, there are two biggest problems. One is takes a long time. It's a long waiting time to see somebody, and that's a problem because the clock's ticking. And the second is it's so much easier to give someone a diagnosis than it is to give them effective treatment for how they're going to live with this. And we created this BHP with that second point in mind. You don't have to come to us for a diagnosis, although we do that. You should come to us if you're really trying to figure out, well, how do I live with this? Where can I mitigate? What are the workarounds? And can you help me anticipate what's going to happen next? This isn't just about the person. It's about the family. It's about the caregiver. It's about everyone. And we need to work harder to help all the people who are involved in these situations.
I love it. And what I love even more is that it is 1 o'clock on the dot. We did this in an hour. We got through the questions. This is great. Kelly says, I assume your videos will provide some examples of how to perform the guided meditation. Right.
There's a lot of additional information that you can get about how to actually do them.
Okay, great. This is wonderful as always. You're a great resource, and I'm just super impressed at the how much you're offering to the practitioners and the consumers, and this is great. So
thanks, Steve.
Folks, this is recorded. I'll have it up on the proaging.com shortly, and then we'll just count the days until we have Dr. Mansbach on again.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank